Hi, I'm IKEA, and for today's video, I want to have a ramble about the journey builds. Now, you might be wondering what those are. You get a set of 3 caches from the journey, completing some of the journeys, that specifically 4, 5, and 6. When you actually complete those journeys and accept your rewards, one of them is a cache for each one. And in those is a build. Now, there is basically a red build from 4, and a blue build from 5, and a yellow build from 6. I haven't actually looked exactly at what they are. I have seen that they are gear sets. And we're going to look at them and see what we get out of them, and then kind of critique what we get, compare them to what I would think would be maybe better versions, or maybe if they hit it on the head, hit the nail on the head, we will congratulate them for it. But and then we will also kind of discuss, what I have in the build collection from that same gear set. I've seen already that they're all gear sets. And then also discuss what upgrade paths might be there and kind of how to upgrade them, of course, and such. I think this will be a fun, interesting little video in between. We won't go too numbers heavy onto this one. I will just discuss it in concepts more so. Also buying me a little bit of time to kind of work on some of the future videos and get the Huntsman video and other videos like with the global modifier kind of up to my standards. So yeah, let's go discuss these journey builds and to kind of show where we get them. So here we've come to the journey screen. On journey 4, actually down here, you can actually see them. Journey build cache. And the first time that I saw these, I was like very curious what these would be. And yeah, they did not disappoint so far. As yeah, they turned out to be actually a full build. And they're actually doing this for in a lot of places, because recently I leveled up a hardcore and we went from level 1 all the way to level 40, and there are now milestone caches or milestone builds that the game basically gives you. So at level 8, 15, 25, and 35, you get a cache as you're leveling. Each of them contains a full build, and also once you open it and actually equip it from that, it even has a few pop-ups and explains what the build does, what it's kind of for, what the talents are, and yeah, tries to already introduce you to build making. And especially while leveling, getting a cache that, for instance, contains multiple pieces of gear that, for instance, at around level 15, you get the cache where you have composure plus Overwatch on a chest and a backpack, or purple backpack, which generally you don't start seeing purple gear up until like 17, 18, 19. So you get 2 pieces that are going to be better than anything you would generally get around that level. And those were very interesting to see those and to kind of see them try to introduce people to builds and also give them some gear to kind of speed up some of the levels in between. And when I saw these, yeah, it kind of clicked for me of like, oh, they're continuing that as well here. And I am very curious what we're going to get out of them. I've already grabbed them all 3 on this character. We are going to go one by one. We're going to start with the firearms one, which is the red build here. Already from the side here, we can see what is in them. And also in each of these is an exotic. Now, of course, that is by itself already pretty worthwhile. And as we're going to get a waveform, we're going to get a chameleon and a Scorpio. All 3, of course, pretty useful weapons, or 2 useful weapons. And the waveform is also not too terrible, even though we don't end up using it much. But starting out, like, not the worst tool to have. So yeah, let's go start popping these and start discussing them. And let's get started. I'm going to open up the red one first, of course, the one that most people will lean to, just the shooty build. Although I already see, of course, we have some negotiator in here, and then a mask and a knee pad item. That already tells me that we're going to get a negotiator with chest and backpack, together with a chameleon. Now, yeah, let's open it up. Let's actually see how this mechanically works. There's also at the milestone ones, and I'm expecting the same here. Yeah, when it gives us everything, actually it does not. It doesn't force us, or well, not force us. With those one as well, you had the option actually to equip them You would click a button, it would equip all of the pieces that it gave you. In general, it would give you 3 pieces. So for instance, for the level 15 one, it was 3 pieces of Fenris for the backpack, chest, and holster, I think, with 1 weapon, a PDR. And it would just equip those pieces, and then it would have a pop-up here explaining what was going on. But instead, through the magic of editing, we'll just equip everything real quickly and just not waste the time as we do so. And this is what we got. Now, not the secondary here, nor the pistol. Those are just from what I had. Here it is given as chameleon. I wonder actually if the rolls are fixed or not, especially for instance on this mask here. And I'll likely know in the future as I'll get these on second account, and I'll make a mental note to remember what this is, or just compare it against this video in the future. Because yeah, we got a Fenris mask, we got some Grupo knee pads, 4 pieces of negotiator, including chest and backpack, and then yeah, that chameleon as our weapon. Now, chameleon definitely a good starter if you you know, in comparison to just having nothing, just having reached level 40, maybe even being on a purple level 39 weapon or such. Once you get this journey done, now of course to get to this point of journey, you might likely, you know, have farmed up a little bit through going through maybe some countdowns, getting some loot through there, as that is of course a really good place to farm some gear. But even maybe for players that haven't ever played negotiator, because I do agree with the choice here with negotiator, not for instance giving striker. While striker would be my recommended build for a person starting out, as for instance is the case on the recommended build list, a negotiator like this might be actually interesting as well for people that have never tried negotiator, because that's gonna be a thing anyway. A lot of people will not have tried negotiator, nor Umbra, nor some of the other red builds, Hunter's Fury, or Sage, or OD, for instance, which are all definitely usable. They're not, of course, the general meta that Striker is, but they're competitive. Not in this form, though, for Negotiator. We'll look actually in a second at build the way I would recommend the Negotiator and the way that I do. But, especially for somebody kind of starting out and they aren't geared up yet, you could run some challenging with this, or definitely hard. You could likely even struggle through heroic, especially if you were to recalibrate it up a little bit. Now, of course, we're getting just some random stats. A new player wouldn't have their library filled in, but especially if you're maybe getting this as somebody who is already, you know, level 40, you're you know, maybe 1k, 2k SHT, you have some resources, but you just haven't ever tried out Negotiator. What would you do with this? And to give a few of those options, we'll go to the build collection. If you aren't familiar with this, I'll link it in the description down below. The build collection is kind of my collection of all my builds across all my characters. There's a bunch of stuff in here. Now, especially if you kind of go to the recommended build list, for those unfamiliar there, there's a ton of builds in here. There is also a negotiator in here, for instance. So if we take my recommended negotiator and look at that, what is different? Well, first of all, we're not going with the chest. Especially with negotiator, you do have an option with going or without going with the backpack. The backpack is kind of optional. It's kind of like the chest on striker. You can take it, and then, for instance, with striker, you have to kind of stack more. With the negotiator backpack, without it, you're doing better single target damage, but you're still doing spread. And with it, you're doing better spread damage, but now you kind of have to focus on actually marking multiple targets. Because let's actually, before we go too deep, as I'm kind of already getting past myself, as kind of excited to kind of discuss through all of this and what we might change and upgrade. First, let's talk about Negotiator itself, because that's important, of course. What does Negotiator do? Well, on the 2-piece and the 3-piece, we get some crit chance and crit damage, making it actually pretty good for people starting out, more so than, for instance, some of the other ones on their 2 and 3rd piece, because, yeah, this makes up for a lot of lack of crit chance and crit damage, maybe from the watch, if you don't have the watch filled in. And then on its 4-piece is, of course, the talent of it. And this is that critical marks or critical hits mark enemies for 20 seconds, up to 3 marks total. And then when you critically hit a marked enemy, all other marked enemies take 60% of the damage dealt. Now, this is the base amounts. This 3 marks is getting increased to 5 marks by the chest. So this is taking it from 3 to 5 marks. And then the 60% spread from the crit damage with the backpack is actually going from 60% to 112%. So actually, when you crit on an enemy, that is when it spreads. It marks them. If you have 2 enemies marked, and you crit on this enemy, it's going to spread to the other enemy and do 112% of that damage, of that crit. If you don't crit on this enemy, nothing gets spread. So the crit chance of the build is important, the crit damage of the build is important, and shooting multiple enemies and marking them, also very important. Now, let's go back and also there is a stacking. We should actually discuss this as well. There is a stacking buff to it, which a lot of people forget. It isn't significant. That's also why we don't discuss it too much, although it is 40 crit damage. But whenever a marked enemy dies, and this is from any source, so it doesn't have to be you killing them. It's just they need to be marked, and even if teammate kills them or they die to some fire or something else, they still count as dying. As long as the mark is on them. You gain 2% critical hit damage, stacking up to 20 times or until combat ends. So this is actually for the duration of being in combat. So whenever combat ends, and for instance, you regen your armor bar in those times and such. So for longer fights, you will build up this extra 40 crit damage. And that is a chunk. That is not nothing, right? That is for instance, 3 Grupo pieces on top once you get the stacking. But this is, of course, over 20 kills, effectively. This, though, does actually count if you shoot, for instance, a turret, and that dies while it is marked. If you shoot an RC car, and that dies while it is marked. All of those actually add into this as well. So it's just not just 20 enemies. You can actually go a little bit faster, especially for some things where you're shooting, if you're fighting a named and they throw out a shock trap. Each one of those shock traps that you shoot, you get a bonus like this. So there is actually ways to kind of get the stack up pretty fast. But then let's go back to how I had it. We'll zoom in as well already a little bit. So the difference here, as we saw with that, is that I'm not going with the chest. The chest, taking that 3 targets to 5 targets. Now you have to consistently try to get, well, at least more than 3 targets, because you can just mark 3 targets in general. The chest takes that to 5, so generally you would want to have 4 or 5 enemies marked. That just becomes a thing that, well, even if you try, unless it's somewhere very specific, or you're, for instance, in a 4-man, especially solo, of course, the numbers are less for enemies. Even, for instance, the territory control, quite often on the first wave has 4 enemies, and then on the second wave has 5. So on the first wave, you couldn't even, if you wanted to. And of course, that comes at the cost of a chest talent. So here we can have Obliterate instead. And this allows us to do more damage to 3 targets, and then we just take that deal instead. We try to hit 3 targets, and that'll be our spread, and then we get the 12% spread from that. Now, of course, if you had the chest and you had the backpack and you're actually marking 5 targets and, for instance, doing a theoretical effectively, you're shooting at 5 targets, you have the backpack, that's, of course, doing a lot more damage. But yeah, that's in actual gameplay, it turns out that 5 target is asking too much. Especially as well, if you're giving up this chest talent, you're even losing a more single target damage. The thing with Negotiator always is kind of trying to find a balance between what you like for single target damage, because for instance, Striker, when we're talking about this as single target or multi-target spread damage, Striker, of course, you're just shooting at one enemy, you're getting stacks up, you're just doing more damage to that one enemy. Here, when there's one enemy, we're just doing less damage because the spread amount is actually where a lot of the bonus comes from. That also means that you can actually go a different route still with Negotiator, because they buffed the backpack. This has made this one definitely my go-to for just the general pick. If you're just going for Negotiator, do take the backpack. Obliterate Chest, Coyote Mask makes for a really good deal. But if we go to the build collection again, there is actually another way you can set it up, which is with a Vigilance backpack. So instead of going with a Coyote, we take a Vigilance backpack. This, of course, eats into our, now we don't have that 112% spread anymore from the backpack. But what we have instead is vigilance, which is, of course, helping our single target damage. So this is kind of the in-between of a striker and a negotiator, or like the backpack negotiator, because we're doing more single target damage with these talents, but we're losing a little bit on that spread damage, and it's kind of the in-between of the two. And I quite enjoy both versions. They play a little bit differently. With the backpack, I definitely want to multi-target. With this one, if I don't hit multiple enemies, or there's just one enemy, there's just unnamed in front of me, we've killed everything else, it hurts a little bit less. Both, though, really work out well. So now knowing what my recommended builds are, what can we do with the pieces that we got out of this? So for this, I am going to assume that these are set with their stats and that we're getting them, you know, for instance, a group of piece with these numbers and, for instance, the Fenris piece that we're getting here with these. I would definitely, and if you want to mess around, for instance, with Negotiator, maybe take it to a countdown, get at least either a knee pad or a mask so you can get rid of the Negotiator chest. On this character, actually, I have a Negotiator mask, so for instance, what we would want is, yeah, we would go get a mask or a knee pad, either or, just so we can get rid of this. We would then go to Cheska chest or Grupo chest or Fenris chest with Obliterate. And nowadays as well, you can actually take Cheska chest because, although not with the Chameleon here, but with other weapons, we can actually, for instance, if we take it to, let's just grab a general AR. Let's grab this FAMAS. If I want to lose some crit damage, nowadays we can. Now, of course, in the past, it wasn't viable at all to go crit damage mods here because they were 5, and the crit chance mods were also 5. No longer the case, of course. We have 10 crit damage here. We can actually put a lot of crit damage here on the weapon. So you could just take, for instance, if you're a veteran player, take your Cheska chest from there, take the Coyote from there, actually, and then in this case, let's grab my Negotiator from this character. So we could, just by, although, of course, for instance, for a newer player, a Coyote wouldn't be there, but let's say first discussing it for veteran players, and that may have already some things to play with. Stick in an Obliterate chest, any variant, honestly, is kind of fine. Stick in a Coyote, go get a knee pad, and then just put crit damages on all these other pieces. Now, of course, with the pieces that we're getting here, not sure still again if it's randomized or not, but none of them were full. But if we just put some crit damage here, it's close enough to kind of play around with. Because, yeah, if we had crit damages just rolled here on all of this, we would land on kind of decent enough numbers. We're not going to specify any here specifically, but we could make some crit chance happen there, put in, you know, make sure to put in a mod as well. And even if we're missing a little bit of weapon damage at that point, that's kind of fine to get a taste of this. This would also then be the way build-wise to kind of go with it for a newer player. Try to find a chest to replace the chest with. Taking the chest is kind of, yeah, theoretically you could make it work. It's one of those ones where if you look just at the numbers, it looks very tasty. But then you take a big bite out of it and you just realize that this meal is way big to eat. And you just go, I would rather have a smaller burger. And this is kind of the case here. So yeah, I would definitely recommend swapping out the chest, whatever you can kind of put in that spot, especially having the Obliterate Tyrant. Of course, if you're starting out and you don't have a Coyote, any combination of having Fenris, Cheska, or Grupo, or even Providence if you have to. But yeah, having, for instance, a Cheska plus Grupo, which actually I have the option here, I think, with that Cheska, and then let's say this Grupo, for instance. Because yeah, we can just go with the brand bonuses instead. We don't per se need the Coyote. The Coyote is nice and actually a bigger damage boost than either of these. But yeah, if you don't have it, you don't have it. Then yeah, go get a Negotiator knee pad in that case, or well, any of the other pieces. This Cheska doesn't need to be here, or the Grupo doesn't need to be here. It's just the chest needs to not be that, and then the other pieces you can kind of swap out, including, as we saw, of course, the backpack. So for the backpack as well, also for veterans, we could, for instance, go Cheska on this piece, and then of course we would fill in with another negotiator piece, just swapping in. So we could even go this route. Make sure to, just recalibrate everything, fill them up. Now then, let's discuss the Chameleon. The Chameleon isn't a bad choice here, especially as well. It has some extra crit chance and crit damage. It does synergize decently well with Negotiator. The biggest downside of the Chameleon is that not per se even in its optimal range, which is 20 meters, which is quite short for an AR that it tries to be. It is very much closer to an SMG. It is also, of course, based on the vector. So the Chameleon is decent, and especially if for somebody starting out, one of the better picks, because they would likely not have an high-end AR that would be which would be considered, equivalent at the very least. So if you're getting this, just run with it, depending on if you have some exotic components. So for instance, more for veterans, if you do want to try out the Chameleon as well, make sure that this third stat becomes damage to targets out of cover. That is, of course, the go-to for any weapon, really, basically any weapon that you see in here as we go through, at least the ones that are mine, not that Chameleon. You see basically everything has damage to targets out of cover, except for the LMGs, which have crit chance. Everything has damage to targets out of cover. That one is definitely a best in slot. So you would have to re-roll it each time. It would cost an exotic component. So for people starting out, not very viable. But at least try to get a damage one here. So either damage to armor, rate of fire, damage to health, but you couldn't. Damage to health is already here. Even headshots, if you had to. Crit damage would be way too low. Crit chance would also be an option. But if it's just, for instance, if it did come with this headshot, that's kind of fine, because the other two stats are kind of full. You could mess around with this, and especially for maybe somebody kind of starting out, because nowadays as well, you can finish the journey pretty easily. I went through the journey, we're a week in. I didn't really actually try hard, and already after 2 or 3 days, I was already at the point where we had access to these. So that will be the case as well for newer players. As you just go through stuff, have the modifier on. Do run that because it is required for some of the things, especially later on. Although actually, you don't need to until you really are doing 7. But with the modifier on and such, you can get through them pretty quickly. And once you get to this point, not the worst setup. The biggest fault, I would say, in it, because the brands that they give us actually Grupo and Fenris, pretty good. 4 pieces Negotiator, actually it being Negotiator, I'm perfectly happy with. The only real one that I would change is just that chest. That was the red one that we kind of looked at. Also as well, actually, the weapon per se doesn't matter for Negotiator. So you could go with a bunch of other weapons than the Chameleon. But that combination is kind of fine. Negotiator with blue screen actually works out pretty well. I kind of like that combo quite a bit. Or, of course, just any high-end. It, of course, spreading crit makes it so that, and also being a high crit build, killer, measured, either of those works pretty well for it. Measured, of course, just feeds into the general damage of it. So you're hitting more often and spreading more from that. So it's equivalent to killer. The idea of just you need more crit, you don't need to, because general damage upgrades are also fine. What you wouldn't want is a talent that, for instance, feeds into headshot or such. But a talent that just feeds into general damage like measured, also fine. But it is very much like Strikers, kind of weapon agnostic. Any weapon could be here. That's also why we kind of separated out discussing each of them. And just upgrade it out, and especially for a person starting out, this could be a good starter build. And let's move on to the stamina one here. So this one comes from Journey 5, as we saw. And this one is the blue build, effectively. So Foundry Bulwark already seen there a 0F and a mask item, even though it's actually with the other one as well. It was showing blue or green, I think even rarity, but it gave 2 high ends in the end. And actually, a really good tool to get, especially for new players, Scorpio. So let's actually open this cache, and no materials received, it says there. Is my inventory full? I think my inventory may have been too full, so it likely went to my to my stash. And actually, yeah, through the magic of editing, we have actually equipped everything. Turns out that, well, it's errored out kind of there, which kind of confused me for a second, because keep in mind as well, I'm actually getting a first reaction to it. It gave me the items anyway, because I was actually sure that I had enough inventory space. So at least I tried to make sure. So at least I had 7. In the end, yeah, it did give it, it just didn't show up there, but we did receive them. And what we got is 4 pieces of Foundry Bulwark here of the gear set, together with an 0F, perfectly unbreakable. And then actually an interesting one, a blue piece. I haven't seen a blue piece on level 40 in forever. There was ways to accidentally get some from Summit in the past. There was some bugginess that you could do. And I should remember exactly what it was, but it was repeatable, and you would get it especially from the rewards of it. So whenever you got like items from completing some of the challenges, as trivia. But yeah, I haven't seen a level 40 blue in like forever. I might actually hang on to a blue piece at level 40 because yeah, we could, that is actually a rarity. And what we're also getting here is a Scorpio. Scorpio, of course, a really great weapon. We'll discuss it in a minute. So 4 pieces Foundry Bulwark here. And then with the backpack, without the chest, just because they want to give you the 0F. Let's discuss first Foundry Bulwark. And what Foundry Bulwark is that we get some total armor from it. Of course, it's also blue core gear set, negotiated that we were talking about a minute ago. It always comes with red cores, and then the stat underneath can be different. Here we're, of course, always getting blue core items. And yeah, here we got also a lot of blue going on, even more so with actually blue there. Yeah, on the 3-piece, we also get 1% armor regen, 50% shield health, and on the 4-piece is actually one of the better talents for tanking. Even though we quite often, for instance, in raid tanks and such, don't per se go with it, but this is whenever you or your shield takes damage, 25% of that amount is repaired to both over 10 seconds. So either me or my shield. So especially, for instance, if I were to run a bulwark with it, 25% of any damage that I take is returned over 10 seconds. Now, of course, this means that you do need to, it shouldn't be humongous hits that, for instance, break the shield in one go. As long as it doesn't break the shield, it's getting healed back for a little bit. And this effectively turns this into a resistance increase. You have to take 25% extra damage as long as it's not in one big chunk. What the backpack does is actually take that from 10 seconds to 5 seconds. So it's the same amount of healing, just getting applied to you faster. It does make a little bit of a difference, especially if you're continuously getting hit, because of course, as you're regenning, you can take more damage. That same damage is now you're getting 5% or 25% from that back. So actually making it faster is the better piece, I generally feel. The chest would increase this to a higher amount as well. I don't actually know off the top of my head how much, because we don't run Foundry Bulwark much. Tanking builds is not per se something we go with in Division. You're better off taking, for instance, a red gear set and putting some blue cores on that, keeping, for instance, the talent that does damage instead of a damage or talent that heals you. And that would be my recommendation here as well. Because actually, if we go to the build collection and go back to the main page here, I don't have any foundries. So we can't go to a recommended build here for this. Now, if you want to keep the pieces for maybe in the future to go raiding with, that is an option, because there you can still run Foundry Bulwark, although the raid tanks are actually nowadays set up without this, because actually in especially Iron Horse, you need hazard protection, which this, of course, this gear set doesn't apply. But yeah, I don't have an example to give you here of what we should do with Foundry, but you can definitely play around with it, because one thing you can do, and especially if you want a little bit of a tankier build, is just to still take what we have here with the blue cores, because especially you're getting these blue cores, of course, and putting just some crit chance crit damage here. So with this build, even though, for instance, here we also have on top of that perfectly unbreakable, I wouldn't per se stack perfectly unbreakable or unbreakable in general plus this gear set. It's too much tankiness, and also not enough for some of the things, because as we talked about, for instance, in the raids, you would need hazard protection as part of that. So you don't have that here. Not to a degree that would matter. We have one roll here, I see, and nothing much else, but you could play around with this. Put, for instance, some crit chances and crit damages here. Go with an SMG main weapon, especially, because then you can gain some SMG or from the class second stat. You can get this crit chance, and that can make up for your lack of crit chance that you will have when you go with this. But you can actually make a decent SMG build with Foundry. Now, in my case, that kind of is already going into the area of what I would consider with tech tanks. Now, in that recommended build list that we were in there, if you're kind of looking for some build that is a little bit tanky, but can actually do some damage, I would recommend the tech tanks out of that list. And this could make for something that is akin to a tech tank, but I feel a tech tank just does a better job. If you put crit chances, crit damages here, fill up the gear mods with some crit chance, crit damages, replace the two pieces of Badger Tough for instance, a Cheska plus a Badger Tough, but then with the chest, in this case, with the Scorpio, so Scorpio being a shotgun, you can't per se put things like Obliterate there. That doesn't work out with shotguns. They don't, Obliterate, for instance, doesn't trigger Propel It. It triggers per shot for shotguns, so it doesn't stack up that well. But I might actually swap this out just to an SMG and try to, kind of, you can make something pretty simply that is decently tanky. So yeah, build-wise, not the worst. I feel actually, going with even more total armor here is, it's in keeping with what the build, like it's coherent to the build, but I feel this one is likely the most lacking of here. But if you want to mess around with Foundry, do, especially for heroic, just put some crit chance for crit damages here, because also a lot of the blue, most of the blue stats, so if we, for instance, take this piece, if we go to the blue stats, what you really have here is armor regen as this, which is just way too little as a stat. So when you have it as a brand bonus 1%, that would be several times over this. And hazard protection would be handy for if you are doing the hazard protection part. This health stat is completely useless. There is no real good way to make health work. And explosive resistance is just way too situational, so you don't per se need that. So generally what we do is actually on the stats underneath it, just either, if you're raid tanking, well, you would have hazard protection there, but you would also go with a different build, because there's much better setups for that. There are in the build collection for the raid. But you can make a somewhat tanky build that can do a little bit of damage, but you're really lacking it here, which, for instance, if you were to take a striker or a heartbreaker or such, keep the blue cores, make a red underneath it, you have that big talent doing damage end of things, and then you just have some blue cores, pair that with a shield, of course gaining skill tiers from blue as well, so we do get a 6-tier shield as we see there as well with this setup as here. And that can make for a decent enough just run and gun kind of build, especially solo for heroic nowadays, because you have more than enough damage there. Let's go discuss the Scorpio. And this Scorpio is actually really a prize here for newer players. Scorpio is a really good shotgun. So what it does is that it has a bunch of status effects that it can apply. These status effects as well, they are based on the percentage of pellets that hit. It isn't based on status effect, as a lot of people always get wrong. And depending on how many times you hit an enemy, you basically go through this list. 2 for poison, 4 for disorient, 6 for shock, 9 for targets take additional damage. Of course, it comes with 7 shots, so that 9, unless you're doing, shenanigans, is after a reload. But the Scorpio, while not great on damage anymore, it used to also be really good on damage, and then also on top of that, do this, can just be used in general for harder parts of fights. And that's what I would do here as well. As we kind of was discussing, just maybe change a little bit this build to become, keep the blue cores maybe, or some of the blue cores, and then have it be crit chance, crit damage on the attributes. Go, for instance, with some Cheska pieces or group of pieces or such, and that as well would make it universal, so you can use it with, for instance, an SMG or an AR as the main weapon. And then especially an SMG fits in really well because you lack kind of crit chance here, so you can kind of make up for that with that. And then use the Scorpio as a secondary, because for a long time, the Scorpio used to be the go-to secondary weapon. As much as nowadays with Striker, we run ACSs, Scorpio used to be on the back of any and all glass high-end builds, which was the meta before that. And that was because you could stun lock enemies with it, at least after it came in. Because as you're shooting an enemy, that enemy, as they're getting poisoned, especially reds and purples, they stagger from that. When we go to the disorient, everybody gets staggered by that except mechanicals. But then even the warhounds and mini tanks, they get shocked. So at the 6, going through those shots, you're basically stun locking an enemy, including hunters, including rogues, including names, including anybody that is in your way. And of course, as well, this damage increase is very much there and potent. But especially just stun locking an enemy, even though nowadays the 612 that the Scorpio is based on isn't really up there in its damage. If you were, going for a damage shotgun, we're kind of going somewhere else, either the SASG or the Super 90. But this stun locking of enemies is one of the great tools. So there's so many places to this day still that, if I'm up against rogues or something, I might, even if I stay on a red build, I'll just put a Scorpio as a secondary just so we can stun lock one down, and then while they're getting disoriented and shocked, afterwards we just swap to the other weapon and kind of unload on them, or they just die to even the lesser damage of the Scorpio because you just are there and hitting them with impunity. As we discussed with the Chameleon, what we would want here especially is, as the third stat, damage to targets out of cover, especially for using it offensively. There is a case to be made, and this actually does get used and might be new to some people, is that what you can do is put magazine size here. And what the magazine size does is add one shot. The 612 can tactically reload. So we go from 7 to 8 if we just tactically reload. We would be one short of this additional damage. If you take magazine size here, you're 8 as the base, and you can tactically reload to 9. This is only used really if it's used on, for instance, an FI, a healer or such, a support build that is just there, that maybe is doing sledge on an enemy and then shooting them 9 times to also apply this debuff to the enemy. So situationally could go with that, but that's just more of a trivia thing for most players. When you know, if you're doing that, you're likely going to be told to, hey, maybe if you're doing it, for instance, in a raid for the raid bosses or such, you're like, if you don't have it, the raid leader might go like, hey, maybe in the future, maybe go find another Scorpio, put magazine size on it. But yeah, that's just more as trivia. But yeah, Detox again as the third stat, you would want to re-roll it. That, of course, each time costs an exotic component, so not per se new or player friendly. But also, I wouldn't say, for instance, this build, the Scorpio is a really good thing to get, especially when starting out. So that is the big price here. The Foundry pieces, it's just generally not worth it. I would rather have, for instance, even if I wanted to blue core pieces and kind of have a tanky build, I would put 4 or 5 blue cores on maybe, for instance, a Hunter's Fury, and then have the damage bonuses from the gear set there. And that would work out much better because just the blue cores, they feed into the shield. So when you're running it with shield, you're pretty tanky with that. You're still a little bit tanky from yourself with a Hunter's Fury as well. Whenever you're getting kills, you have armor on Gil. So all of those things feel a little bit better here. This one, well, the Negotiator one definitely was one that, yeah, out of the box, you could maybe use it with a little bit of modification. You could actually make a really good build out of it and just run it. This one, I might keep the blue. I would definitely keep the Scorpio. The rest, might go, although actually hang on, if you are a new player, hang on to this 0F, or hang on to at least a 0F, because you will need one for the summit floor 100 once you have, once you do the Ridgeway project. The Ridgeway project requires one of these, so maybe hang on to it for that. And lastly, but let's find out of leastly, we have the Seasonal Journey Cache Electronics. This one comes from Seasonal Journey 6, which is, yeah, kind of the yellow, the skill builds kind of side of things. Yeah, let's open the cache. Let's actually see if it shows this one. Okay, so unlike the last one where it didn't want to show it, this one, it does show. So yeah, we get a waveform, we got a purple wyvern piece, 4 pieces of hardwired with the chest and the backpack, and a surge. The waveform definitely is... well, it's at least an exotic. The surge definitely is not worth it. But yeah, let's actually equip this up here and discuss it. And now that we have it all equipped, as I've gone through and just put them in there, we see that it is a hardwired set here with 4 pieces with the chest and backpack again. And yeah, indeed, purple mask with skill haste, explosive resistance, and a waveform. Now, this, of course, can definitely be used just as a skill build, just out of the box. Though I would go a different route with this. Now, hardwired, what hardwired is, just to explain that first, is, yeah, on the 2 pieces, we get some skill haste. On the 3 piece, we get some skill damage and repair skill. And one of the things with hardwired is as well, originally, it was one of the very few gear sets for skills, honestly, the only one. And because of that as well, it had components that you could use it for healing. So yeah, it has some repair skill and it has some skill damage. And what its special talent is that whenever you use or cancel a skill, your other skill's cooldown is automatically reduced by 30 seconds while increasing total skill damage and repair by 10% for 20 seconds. And also, yeah, this feedback loop can occur once every 10 seconds. What this effectively means, before we kind of look at the chest and the backpack, we change it up a little bit, is that every 10 seconds, if you use one skill, you're removing 30 seconds of cooldown from the other skill. Now, with most skills, they will be below 30 seconds to begin with, especially here, for instance, where I have the watch filled in. So yeah, reducing them by 30 seconds will just reset them. That 30 seconds is in place so that for some skills that are much longer duration than that, and they're balanced because of in that way, basically, and those are then excluded from this option. So when we use one skill, we basically, and the talent is off cooldown, which is a 10-second cooldown at its base, we basically reset the other skill. So you can use one skill, get the other skill back as long as it's off cooldown. What the chest does is actually increase that 10%, and we also, when we do that, we get a 10% bonus at the space here for 20 seconds. Here we get with the chest, we take that 10% to 25% skill damage bonus. Total skill damage bonus being, not additive to the skill damage that we have here, but in its own separate total skill damage pool, kind of in the same way that total weapon damage is. But then the backpack is actually the really good part of hardwired, where we take that 10 seconds to 5 seconds. Now, every 5 seconds, whenever we use this skill, that skill comes off cooldown, as long as it's under 30 seconds. And what this mostly gets used for is a seeker spam setup. Because if we go to the version that I have in the build collection, this is 2.08 in the build collection, and this has been there for forever, which is a seeker spam build. What we're doing here is, yeah, as I can explain there with the hardwired, and what it does, we can use one skill here. I'm using a hive to reset the other one here, the seeker, and yeah, 3 guesses which one we're resetting or trying to reset the most, and just spamming. The seeker spam build is very nice, especially now. The changes to hardwired a few seasons ago kind of flew under the radar, I still feel, because this is actually a very potent build. Now, seekers still they're hit and miss, quite literally. They miss a lot. But in the right circumstances, especially in a group setting, that's also not per se even the worst thing, because they will push enemies in group settings. They will push enemies out of cover, because if they stay in cover, they get hit. If they jump out, well, now they're easy targets for your allies. Together with that, last season, this was really good with the overcharge. When you have overcharged seekers, then you have a much bigger radius on them, and they are more. They have a higher tendency to hit. The thing is, especially on heroic difficulty, enemies are very wily, and they will try to not get hit by seekers. But in this way, you're sending out so many seekers that they kind of they get hit by some of them. Some of them will hit. You're just increasing the numbers by so much that something will hit effectively. And the way that we go for this then, as we see here that I have it set up, we're taking 4 pieces with the backpack, but without the chest. The chest is a decent increase, but the consistency of, for instance, here, glass cannon is much better. Then the BTSU glove in here is used together with the hive, because I find the hive actually a really good tool as well. We have a lot of skill damage in here. A stinger hive that we are using here will actually do a lot of damage. But as we saw as well, we have some repair skill a little bit on the gear set. Now that isn't enough per se to go that route, but one thing we can do, and that's kind of, for instance, what we showed in the build showcase with this as well, is we could swap out these skill hastes, because we don't need them per se, to repair skill. Then we can take a healing hive, and then we can have a healing hive that we use for our friendlies and a seeker that we use for our enemies. Because every time that we put out the seeker, basically this is kind of a build that becomes about rotation, if you're familiar with that from MMOs, because we throw out the seeker, we basically wait for it to disperse, we put out our hive, triggering the hardwire trigger, of course, we get our seeker back, a new seeker goes out, which now as well has the 10% total skill damage from that. That goes out. Once that goes out, usually now with the 5 seconds, we can actually trigger it again. But what we could do, and in the past with the 10 seconds we would do, is trigger, for instance, a supercharge. So the BTSU glove, when we overcharge with it, when we deconstruct our hive, we actually, if we are at 6 skill tiers at that time, we give an overcharge to all of our allies. And that's very powerful, resetting all of their hives, if you're with a bunch of red builds. But even if someone's running, for instance, let's say a pulse, that pulse now can be used in an overcharged form and will apply a damage debuff to the enemy for 15%. If they're running foam, they have a very large radius foam that can get a bunch of enemies stuck, and they would then also be easier to hit for you, for the seeker, of course. Or even invulnerable shields. Being overcharged is a really strong tool, and this thing overcharging a whole rate, for instance, can be very strong. That's why we, for instance, there use BTSUs quite often. But even, for instance, in Countdown, it goes across both subgroups. So it is very strong for that, but it's of course not in here. We don't have a BTSU in the pieces that we got there, but this is how this build works. If we also then kind of look at the weapons, we kind of see that I don't have a surge in here. I do have a capacitor, and let's actually take it back to the game, because that would be the upgrade path here for this build, I would say, is to get it set up in that same way. Now, one piece that we could discuss here right away is this surge. The surge does have some synergy with skill builds. Headshots grant plus 25 skill damage for 15 seconds. You might have not seen much of Spike, especially for instance, more veteran players. The reason we don't use it is because the capacitor exists and also InSync exists. InSync kind of came in and has become much better, just numbers-wise. It's bigger than Spike. It is easier to trigger. That headshot is actually not that easy to hit. We just don't use this. I would have actually considered they should have put a test subject here. I feel that's a much better fit for it with perfect InSync, or well, even if you're feeling very generous, you might put a harmony in it, which is a DZ item. But yeah, just putting a surge in here. This one is like the weakest part of this. Definitely don't use that one. What you could get, for instance, if you have a capacitor lying around, grab that. If you don't have a capacitor lying around, you might be somewhat of a newer player. The capacitor is a reward from doing 5 summit challenges. That can be done even by a new player in half an hour at most, 10 minutes. If you're experienced, you can likely do it in 5. You basically have to do 5 challenges there. If you go into the menus when you're in Summit, there is a challenges tab. In the challenges tab, you can do challenges that are either doing, for instance, 3 floors in 15 minutes or getting 15 head or 30 headshots, I think, destroying some weak points. Pretty simple things. There's also some complex things, like, you know, you have to get a headshot kill and then a shotgun kill in like 5 seconds several times in a row. There's complex things, but there's simple things, like as we discussed, getting just some headshots, doing 3 floors in 15 minutes, or just doing 6 floors in total with a few directives. All of those things are pretty simple, and you can very quickly get a capacitor. That would be the go-to piece to get for this if you want to use it. And then, yeah, as we kind of saw, well, this is not the worst fix. The wave form as well, with the way that we generally tend to use hardwired for, the waveform doesn't fit in here at all. The waveform, if you're not familiar with it, is an exotic for skill builds. Actually, let's read through the text. Generate a stack of 3% skill damage on one of your skills every second, capping at 10 stacks. After 10 seconds at the cap, the stack transfers to your other skill. The process then repeats ad infinitum. So what this does, to explain it a little bit more, maybe more clearly, it has basically, it's starting to both of your skills, it starts filling up a bar to, let's say, first our sticky here. It's going to fill up over 10 seconds up to that 30% extra skill damage. It'll stay there for 10 seconds, and then it'll, over 10 seconds as well, start to swap over and go to the seeker, and then fill up there, give you the full amount there for 10 seconds, and then go back and forth and back and forth. That is what it does. Now, with the hardwired, what we want to do is use skills that have cooldowns, and we're just going to toss them out there, get a hit in, try to get the cooldown back, get them out again. That doesn't actually synergize well with the waveform. The waveform in general is not one that I pick much. You will not see one on the build collection because I just don't end up using them, because it is, I would rather have the consistency of just the bonus just there always, and it's not, for instance, on the sticky when I'm using my seeker, or especially on third drone builds, it's not on the drone when it's destroyed maybe and you just have the turret now without a bonus, and it feels a lot weaker than just having a wyvern piece there. The other piece, a wyvern piece, perfectly fine, although yeah, purple here. The upgrade path for this, I would definitely say, while you don't need per se that BTSU, because that might be a harder piece to get rid of the chest, get rid of the waveform, so swap those maybe around so that you have a high-end chest, and generally either go with kinetic momentum or glass. Now, kinetic momentum also doesn't synergize too much here, but you could at least keep some uptime on it. Other things you could go with is Overwatch. That works pretty well, where you just in cover and also giving out a group buff. And then things like this, at least especially if you're using things that aren't turret and drone. And I wouldn't say hardwired is really great for turret and drone. Turret and drone can make for a really good general use build. So if you're running a turret drone build, you're just putting out that turret and a drone. They do consistent damage. They have high uptime. They just, shoot at the enemies and kill them. A build like this is much more set up for continuously using some of the skills. And this, for instance, would be more of a build that you would run in a group, because you don't have the ability yourself to, for instance, really deal well with heavy targets. So especially heavies, just the tanks of the enemy, things like the warhounds and such, or especially as well named. This especially hits a lot of enemies at once. It isn't so much about the single target damage. So you would use this in group. So yeah, you could kind of set it up with that. And then, for instance, yeah, go Overwatch or Glass with it. Overall, yeah, Hardwired is definitely a build worth having. It isn't one of the top builds. But yeah, you have some pieces here at least to make a start. You would, yeah, recalibrate here towards having skill damages everywhere. You don't per se need the haste, not even in the mod form. But also, for instance, for these skills, things like skill duration, which would be the other option, because or just some repair skills. if you take repair skills with, for instance, yeah, Healing Hive, that can be an option. But yeah, the skill duration also doesn't help much. So the mod slots, you're kind of, you don't have too much there, so you might as well just put haste there. And yeah, go get a capacitor, get rid of the chest, because I would say the chest is not per se worth using. Although, as we discussed here, yeah, maybe if you don't have anything else, for the time being, maybe you can just make it work. You could just run this with Turtle Drone, but yeah, it wouldn't be the effective build for it. And yeah, let's round this out, as yeah, I did get it a little bit longer than I wanted, but also I wanted to ramble for a bit, as as implied by the title. These journey builds are actually quite interesting. I'm very much in favor that they have added those in, and they are giving some incentive to people to maybe play around, and especially on the red end, getting a few negotiator pieces might incentivize some people to try out negotiator, because it's definitely one of the top contenders for red builds. There are some gear sets like, let's say, Virtuoso or Breaking Point or Aces, which aren't really in a good spot. Negotiator is one of those. Negotiator is one of the top contenders, together with Umbra and OD, and of course the king of the hill of Striker. So yeah, especially that one, I feel is a pretty good way of introducing maybe some gear to newer players and also maybe veterans. The other two, I feel actually on the yellow end they could have gone with Refactor. That would have been my pick for it. They very much more easily a build where you can just put a turret and a drone in it and have actually decent results. And of course, in a group setting or even solo, heal yourself and heal your teammates in a group setting. Foundry on the blue end. I understand. But yeah, we just don't run blue builds that much. I would have maybe even leaned, if you're going the blue core route, you could go Heartbreaker, but that's kind of a conceit, of course, because Heartbreaker is more of a red set, except it has blue cores. They could have gone True Patriots. Honestly, I would have thought that would be a better idea than just Foundry. Foundry just doesn't doesn't end up getting used as much, even though that you couldn't make something competent with it. Just putting some crit chance in there, maybe putting an SMG on it, keeping the blue cores, and then just the rest goes towards damage, kind of the mentality of tech tanks, for instance. But yeah, we went through these builds, and yeah, I hope they do these next season as well, and then of course different ones and in different ways, and maybe introduce some people to those as well. And with this as well, I hope I've given you some insights into these gear sets if they're completely new to you, but also maybe some ideas if you want to play around with them. Maybe you haven't ever tried out Negotiator, and now that you have some pieces, you might go like, what can I do with this? Well, for instance, this. Same for Hardwired, as the Seeker Spam build, I would say, is not a top contender, not something I would always pull out, not in the same degree as, for instance, Eclipse or even Refactor for some settings, but definitely a build that you can play around with, have a few nice evenings with, and enjoy your time with it. And yeah, the Negotiator, of course, very much so as well. So yeah, let's end up this rambly video by just rounding it out. For future videos, we're going to go into Huntsman, of course. That is the next video. We're going to go over its numbers, and together with that as well, Frenzy got a little bit of a change, so we can discuss all those. Then I will also likely do a video of my thoughts on the Brooklyn DLC, as yeah, we have had some time here to spend in beautiful Brooklyn, and yeah, it is truly a marvelous place, and I've enjoyed my time here already, I can tell you. But yeah, we'll go over some of my thoughts on it. So I hope you join me for those, but for now, as always, have a good night.